Welcome viewers once again to this course on educational leadership. In the last class we are discussing about educational research, and we are discussing about why it is so important in educational setup and it is how it is related to pedagogy, etc. So, in that context we are discussing about some of the aspects of educational research, how to select the problem, identify the problem, etc. Now, we will just further continue the same topic, like how to select a research question. So, always start with a research question, like suppose even though we are overwhelmed, fascinated by so many research topics, ideas, concepts, etc., but to convert it into a research question is a very difficult task. We may have so many burning ideas, topics, etc., concepts, etc., but how to frame research question out of that is the most challenging job. So, and for that matter, when we are selecting a research question, we have to map it in terms of selecting the right research method, in terms of the tools, in the techniques, in terms of the getting the sample, all kinds of things. So, what is the when we are framing the research question, then we have to verify what are the choices available for studying this research question, for studying this research objective. What are the choices available right now, like whether experimental methods will be suitable for or not. So, what are the experimental methods available for us, and or whether we should stick to any kind of qualitative methods, or so maybe that is for certain research questions qualitative methods are more appropriate, and it can give us in depth ideas, analysis, etc. Or maybe that it is just a kind of descriptive or narrative research where we need to do content analysis or archival research, etc. Or maybe that we need to validate it in terms of its external validity, generalizability, adaptability, applications, etc. So, there whether we should stick to the quantitative methods by adopting statistical questions. So, always when we frame a research question, we have to find out what are the appropriate choices available for us in terms of selecting the right research methods, and from that which one we should select. So, then again now the question is how to identify good research problems. Now, this is the most challenging job. So, how to identify good research problems. So, the problems should state a relationship between variables. So, these are the basic you can say basic principles of formulating the research problem, that the problem should state a relation between variables. So, when we are selecting or identifying a research problem, then we have to also be very particular, very clear about like this research problem, it involves how many variables. First of all, how many variables, whether one variable its impact on other variable, whether it involves 2 variable, 3 variable, 4 variable, how many variables it involves, and minimum thing is that there must be 2 variable at least 2 variable, and the problem should state that a kind of relationship exists between these 2 variables. So, while identifying the research problem, we can select it as a form of research objective, like it is our research objective or the purpose. We can formulate it in terms of research objective, or we can also form a research questions. So, either it can be in a statement way like a research objective, or it can be in a question format. So, it can be in a question form as well. For example, what relation exists between 2 or more variables. So, in that format, that means in here we can put the same research goal or objective in terms of a question, research questions. So, similarly, the do teacher competence comments cause improvement in students' performance. This is also research question, but we have to validate whether it will be an authentic research question or not, authentic research problem or not, can it be verifiable. So, do teacher comments cause improvement in students' performance? It is a question, research question. Now, we have to further analyze whether it can be verified or not, whether it can be validated or not. Similarly, under what, for example, this is a research question, under what conditions does learning take place and how to learn to transfer it to new situation. Let us say again it is a question, but is it possible, is it feasible to verify? It is verify because it involves so many complexities, so many the complex relationship between the 3 variables. Like one is that under what condition learning takes place, and again under and how the learning, how to learn, again learning how to transfer this learning to the new situation. So, it involves many sub questions as well. So, that is why the problem should be stated in a very clear and unambiguous forms. So, when we are posing a problem, selecting a problem, not only that it establishes, it shows a kind of relationship between the between two variable or three variable, but those relationships should be very clear, should be unambiguous. That means any layman, any normal person or any non domain person can also understand what it actually asks, what it wants to verify. So, the problem should be stated in a very clear, conspicuous and unambiguous format. For example, purpose of the study, again purpose of the study may not be the problem always. Maybe that our intention is to bring some reform. For example, in some situation our intention is to, purpose is to bring certain reform in the situation, in the classroom, etc. But that purpose always cannot be a research problem. Okay. So, having a goal, selecting a goal, setting a goal or having a purpose will not always be helpful in getting a good research problem. So, purpose of the study may not be the problem always. So, even though we have some specific goals, some purposes in educational context, but these purposes and goals may not be proven to be the good research problems. Next is a scientific problem should contain implications for the testing, like whimsically or being fascinated by some of the concepts and ideas and philosophies, models, this and that, we should not select a research problem. But if we are selecting a research problem, so it should be very much scientific, it should involve logical thinking, rational thinking, and it must have some implications in terms of its testing, in terms of its improving the performance, in terms of enhancing the effectiveness. So, a scientific problem should contain implications for testing. So, not only that it should be applicable, it should have some implications of some effect and some influence and application some other situation, but again those things can also be again further verified. So, scientific, if the problem is scientific, then it can be validated, it can be re-examined, it can be re-experimented again and again. So, a scientific problem should contain the implications for testing. So, when we select a research problem, it can further be, not only it can be applied, it has the immense implication, but further it can be experimented, further it can be evaluated again. So, not only the relations are stated, but the variables should be measured. Like, yes, this research problem should state some kind of relationship between two variables, but even though it states some kind of relationship, but how to measure that? How to measure that relationship? So, for that matter, whichever variables we have taken for studying it, examining it, so we must have proper tools, techniques or materials to measure those things. So, these two variables should be measurable variables. If you have taken the teaching methods, then it should be measurable. If we are taking the students' achievement, it should be measurable. If you are taking the classroom behavior, it should be measurable. So, not only it's enough for getting some kind of relationship, but these two variables should also be measured. Epistemological or metaphysical questions are not good research problems. Like, for example, as we have already discussed, philosophical ideas, philosophical or abstract ideas, and highly epistemological or metaphysical questions actually are not the good research problems. For example, like does democratic education improves the learning of youngsters? It is a philosophical question, it is an epistemological question, but how to verify it, how to examine it, how to explain it, how to justify it, how to validate it. So, does democratic education itself is such a topic which cannot be easily measured. So, our variable democratic education, can it be really measurable? Again, improve the learning of youngsters. Youngsters is a huge, it's a generation of learners. The sample size will be, the population, the sample size will be huge. Then how to measure their learning, and then there is no boundary of learning here. So, mapping the learning of the youngster, again it will be a very challenging task. no such proper or appropriate tool and techniques will be available. So, selecting these kind of vague questions, broad questions, ambiguous questions will not not the proper approach to the education research. So, similarly, are the group processes good for children? Again, group processes, like we can, so when we say that, talk about the collaborative learning. For example, collaborative learning, whether collaborative learning improves the students' performance. So, when we are talking about the collaborative learning, then we have to specify this collaborative learning in a particular context, within a age group, in a particular subject domain. So, we have to bring certain boundaries, certain constraints, like limitation in particular context, whether collaborative learning improves the students' performance. But broadly taking collaborative learning or group process, whether it improves the students' performance, children's performance, is a vague question. So, scientific problems are not the moral or ethical questions. So, when we are selecting a research problem, not that always ethical questions or philosophical questions or moral questions are not the scientific problems, which, because again there is the subjectivity is involved in the moral ethical questions. It involves subjectivity, it varies from individual to individual, from context to context, from the group, different groups groups, and from institution to institution. So, moral questions, ethical questions are actually not the scientific questions, scientific problem, because it cannot be verified easily, and there is a high amount of subjectivity and individual variations in this. So, problems are not the techniques and methods of sampling and measurement. Again, while selecting the problem, we should not take this method or that method, or sampling this, whether snowball sampling or random sampling, or this sampling or that sampling method is the good. This cannot be research problem. There are different sampling techniques. According to our research problem, according to our population, we can select one or other type of sampling method, but comparing or taking the sampling technique, sampling method as a research problem, it is a foolishness. Okay. So, problems are not the techniques or methods of sampling and measurement. So, it must be the problem, research problem must be a valid research problem, it must be authentic, it must be scientific in the sense that it can be verifiable, it can be re-examined, it can be evaluated, it can be the relationship between the variables can be mapped properly, it can be measurable, and again we can further re-examine it, further re-evaluate it for its validity and implications. So, here is the example to determine the reliability of the instruments. To determine the reliability of different instruments are there. We are using the instruments in different situation, in different contexts. They have different purposes. Then what is the purpose of reliability? If in a particular context, in a particular situation, for a specific task, if you have 4 or 5 instruments, then we can verify its efficacy, like under this situation, under this context, which instrument is more reliable, more predictable in terms of its operation, in terms of its accuracy, in terms of its cost effectiveness, or in terms of its timing, etc. So, that is a separate questions, but to determine the reliability of instruments in general. So, what kind of research problem it is? So, to assign the pupils randomly. So, these kind of questions are not the good research problem. To assign the pupils randomly, to test the significance of difference between means. So, these kind of things, these kind of issues are not actually the research problems. The next is the problem should not be too general or the vague. So, as we have already discussed that in the research, education research, the time is as a resource, is a big resource. It involves how much time it involves. Like if you have the 3 years time, 2 years time, what is the time limit we have right now, and the resources available for us, and the financial resources, the manpower resources, the timing, the infrastructure. So, in that particular context, what should be the size of the research problem. So, therefore, taking the too much broad research problem will be a very vague one, or taking the very small portion kind of project or assignment as a research problem would also very that means it is not successful, it will not be useful, and it is completely useless. So, the problem should not be too general, which is beyond our control, which is beyond our resources and utilization ability, or beyond our time framework, etc., which is very vague and broad, or else you can say it is very specific, very too specific. What happens generally in case of the longitudinal studies, which continues over a long period of time. So, they have designed the research in that way, and they have distributed it among the different groups, and they have identified different kinds of research problems, and many people, a number of people, a large number of pool of people, researchers are involved or engaged in that kind of research. So, that is why the longitudinal research problems are very time consuming, very, you can say, very tough, very elaborate, and very lengthy process, but it involves at the same time huge resources, huge amount of time as the resources, manpower, human being, researchers. So, all kinds of resources are also required. So, here we can say an example, creativity is a function of self actualization of the people. So, it is a very vague and broad question, how to measure creativity, again it is a individual component, again it is subjective, then again self actualization, how to measure self actualization, again it is a very abstract concept. So, how to establish the kind of relationship between these two things. So, it is a very, you can say, very difficult and very, you can say, vague kind of research problem to select it as a research problem. Yes, we can say that creativity or creative thinking process, how it takes place in case of the children, how it takes place in case of the adults, how it takes place in case of proper professional group, etc. That is a different thing, but creativity as a function of self actualization is very difficult to prove it. So, we should narrow down the problem to a workable size, but not too specific and the trivial. So, we have to map a research problem in terms of its size, in terms of specificity, in terms of time it will consume, in terms of the resources, and in terms of selecting selecting research method, in terms of selecting, or in terms of getting the proper measurable tools to measure these variables in order to establish the relationships. So, we have to, you can say, customize it as per our requirement, as per the appropriateness, as per its usability, or as per its utility. So, but we should not narrow down it to be very silly, very trivial and very insignificant. Okay. So, example like to assess the relationship between speed of reading and size of typing. Is it a question? So, assess the relationship between speed of reading and the size of typing. So, like what would be the font size of the text material, and accordingly what would be the speed of reading. But again individual variations are there, and so many things. But what it is going to give us, what kind of result it is going to yield. So, even though we have found some or other kind of result, in which way it is going to be useful for us or for others. So, what would be its applications? So, these trivial questions are very silly questions, which we should not select as the research problem. So, the research problem should consider the target population, situation and context, process of measuring the variables. So, while identifying the research problem, we should map it in terms of its feasibility, like what would be the population, from where we can draw the sample, and what should be the minimum sample size, whether the sample represents that population characteristics or not, and which situation and in which context we are going to verify the concepts or the variables. Then how to measure the variables, whatever concepts and variables we have selected, and independent or dependent variable. So, what would be the process of measuring those variables, in which context situation, whether it is a real life situation, the classroom situation, or in the laboratory condition, or in a railway station, or in a workplace like the factory, where we are going to measure these variables. So, we have to consider these things as well. The problem variables should be operationally defined and feasible. Like the concept, the terminologies, they may have different meanings, different interpretation, different definitions. So, for our study, we have to operationally define it, like in our study, what does it mean? What, like for example, students achievement or effectiveness of a particular program, or effectiveness of teaching methods, or the impact of teacher student relationship. So, we have to operationally define it, like what it means in our study, otherwise it can be misinterpreted, interpreted, or maybe interpreted in multiple ways. So, the problem variable should be operationally defined, not only operationally defined, but it should be feasible, it should be possible to actually measure it, should be feasible and possible to actually verify it, examine it, and should not be replicated as it is from the previous empirical work. So, suppose for example, when we are selecting certain research problems or the variables to be studied, we need to go through the empirical literature, empirical work and literature review, whether these concepts have already, variables have already been verified, examined or not, and if it has been it has been studied, then how. So, we have to, that is why literature review is a mandatory component before selecting the research problem. Suppose if it has already been done, and what is the use of necessity of repeating it once again, and even though we want to repeat it, then it should not be replicated as it is. We need to, like suppose some of the concepts and variable we need to re-examine, revalidate it in a particular context. There we can select or identify the variables, but it should not be replicated as it is. Rather, we have to find out the gap areas. Like, yes, in the past, in the literature it has already been done, the empirical works have already been done, but these have been focusing on certain other aspects, and these are the areas which have been left out, and now I am going to focus on these left out or gap areas. So, even though it can be re-examined, verified, re-studied, but it should not be replicated as such, but it in different forms. So, but can be meaningful extension of the previous one. So, that means whatever they have already been done, or the researchers have already been done, and whatever left outs, like some other dimensions which have not yet been covered, then we can continue the same research in terms of the new dimensions, in terms of emerging issues and topics, etc. So, that is a review of literature is a must for selecting the authentic relevant research problem. That is why before selecting a research problem, we need to do a review of literature in terms of theoretical backup, in terms of empirical backup, in terms of cross cultural data, in terms of experimental data. We need to go through the whole lot of literature review before selecting a relevant problem. Now, we will discuss about the educational research training. So, prior to actually conducting the educational research or identifying a research problem, etc., we need to have certain training. So, the students of different disciplines, domains, we should have some kind of orientation of the training prior to the educational research. So, what are these factors? Like, first is the dimensions. Dimensions, good research training is supported by academic structure, policies and the practices. So, good research training, like prior to actually conducting the research, educational research, or engaging ourselves in experimental research, laboratory research. So, we need to have some kind of orientation and training. So, that is why it says that the good research training is supported by, when we are advocating for the good research training, it should be supported by the academic structure. What is the academic structure of that institution? And if, like some institutions, some organizations are very good in giving the research training, because they have a very good academic structure. Their policies are very much pro research kind of policies, and their practices are also very much research friendly. The atmosphere, the environment they have created are very research friendly, and which facilitate. So, the good research training, it facilitate also require and promote the academic research integrity. Not just enough to create a good research environment in terms of structure, policy and practices, but also it should also adhere to, stick to some kind of policy matters. Like good research training, it advocates, it promotes the academic research integrity. That must be some kind of ethics, values and philosophy must be involved in research training. That means how to conduct research, good research, how to select a good research problem, how to conduct research, how to select the research method. That should be some kind of ethics and values and principles should be involved. So, one such values and principle is that integrity, academic integrity. That means maintaining the academic integrity. Like suppose in the literature review, without doing the literature review, or in the, even though we have done the literature review, somebody has somebody has already done the research on that, but by ignoring all these things, we are just trying to copy down the same experiment, same thing, etc., just to produce our research thesis, etc. So, that is not the honesty, that is not the integrity. So, we have to maintain the academic research integrity and responsible research conduct. So, responsible research conduct shows that you have to be unique, you have to have an original idea, you have to be innovative, you have to be different, you have to adopt a discovery approach, you have to something different, something new, and you should not replicate, you should not copycat any of the research problems. So, it is not about copy paste kind of thing, or it is you can say repeating or plagiarizing any of the research topics. So, you must have the good research conduct, ethical scholarship, it also research also involves ethical values, scholarship, academic integrity, research integrity. These are the, you can say, the primary principles of good research training. So, that is the three important components are there. One is the academic integrity. You must have as an academician, as a professional, you must have the integrity, academic integrity. You must have the ethics, professional ethics, values and ethics in your, that means your disciplinary ethics and values domain ethics. Then intellectual property. If you are quoting somebody's work, if you are that means giving an example of somebody's work, then you need to acknowledge that person, we need to acknowledge that study, you need to acknowledge that authors are in your study, in your reference, in your thing. So, that is the, because whoever has created something new, has done something new, it is his or her academic intellectual property, it is his or her copyrights. So, even though we are quoting, we are citing as an example this and that, we need to acknowledge that person, we need to recognize his contribution. So, these are the three components, academic integrity, ethics and values in research, and the intellectual property. These are the three important components. Then research also must have some kind of benchmarkings, that means how to ensure its quality through this benchmarking, like the benchmarking with good practice framework. The research must have the benchmarking in terms of its quality, in terms of its validity, in terms of credibility, in terms of its generalizability. So, that it proves that benchmarking with a good research practice, like the at the result of, like for example, how do you evaluate the benchmarking, like in terms of programs outcomes, like if you have conducted some research, how authentic that program was, and what would be the, what were the outcomes. So, in terms of the programs which have been conducted, or in research program, doctoral program, pre-doctoral program, or master's program, etc., and what are the outcomes, the results, the findings, and to what extent it ensures, it gives you the opportunity for the employment, that is employability skill development. After engaging in a 3 years research program, 4 years or 5 years research program, what kind of employable skills you have developed, what kind of employable or job related skills you have learned and developed, as a result of which it ensures your future in getting a job. So, on the basis of these two things, we usually map the benchmarking, the quality of the research work. Then continuous improvement for the educational research in the universities. So, universities that means which are the places of the higher learning, the embodiment of the community research programs and higher learning institutes. So, they must promote research opportunities, avenues, and the practices and the policies, etc., in terms of many you can say attempts, many innovative ideas, innovative strategies, you can say innovative practices. So, there must be continuous improvement of educational research in case of the universities and the institutes of the higher learning by adopting certain strategies like industry academic partnership. Nowadays, it is a very important topic, emerging topic, like suppose we are conducting academic research in universities, but it is of no use for anybody. Neither the industry people wants it, uses it, or nor the common man, nor the society, nor the schools, nor the institution they are using it. So, what is the purpose of spending time, money and resources in this kind of research? So, there must be industry academia partnership, where the academia, the researchers, they would get the idea of what actually the industry people they need, they require, and what kind of research output can be useful for them in enhancing their productivity or processing, etc., etc. So, in that way, so both the academia and industry people, they must partner with each other in identifying the research problem which will be mutually beneficial for them. Then the research engagement programs. So, what are the, so both the partnership, both the partners, mutually sitting with each other and having the dialogue and discussing all the issues, they can also set up some kind of research engagement programs. The industry, often the industry people also sponsors, often the industries people, they sponsors the internship program, some kind of scholarship program, some kind of students exchange programs, exchange programs. So, this kind of activities promotes the research quality. So, similarly, industry engagements and inspiring mind scholarship, these are again the initiatives taken by the different entrepreneurs, industry people, organizations. Similarly, doctoral skill development programs. So, prior to actually conducting the research program, so a kind of orientation kind of, or you can say crash course, or a kind of internship on the skill development program. So, how to develop the doctoral research skills, a program can also be conducted on that, the doctoral skill development programs. Similarly, integrated PhD, like you can integrate the PhD program, research program with the MS program, masters program, or MTech program. So, integrated PhD programs are also these kind of initiatives. So, inspire inter-university research training conferences, when the two universities, two educational institutions, they collaborate with each other in not only in terms of their faculty exchange program, but in student exchange program, they can also jointly organize some kind of research training conferences for their students. They can invite the other experts from in the industry, from other organizations. They mutually can collaborate and design a program where not only their students will be benefited, but other people can also participate. So, collaborative research and is such a collaborative research, again it is a joint kind of research venture projects, like with different organizations, maybe it is industry, academia, or maybe 2-3 universities, foreign university, indigenous university, they collaborate with each other. They have taken up a topic and issues and problems which will be beneficial to a large sector of population. So, similarly, research student exchange program, postdoctoral fellowship program, doctoral fellowship programs. So, similarly, sometimes before the conference also we can have a pre-research coursework. Nowadays, there are so many conferences, international conferences, they also organize the pre-conference workshops on some kind of statistical package, on some kind of quantitative data analysis methods, on some kind of qualitative analysis method. So, they may also organize some kind of pre-research coursework for helping the students, research students, for enhancing their knowledge, skills and abilities in educational research. So, next class we will continue on this topic. Now, for the time being, we stops here now. Thank you very much.